And so what I'm sharing with you is kind of half-baked. I'm not always all the way there yet. But what I started looking at was this culture thing, and what I quickly recognized is it's not just culture. It's also management context, it's structural context, and the one I'm really loving here, because remember I'm a former psychologist, it's a personal context too. But what you've got is you've got all these different contextual factors that affect one another. And oh, by the way, I don't pay much attention to the external context because I really can't do anything about that. But you've got all these different contextual factors that affect what we do. And I think this is an incredibly simplistic diagram. I just haven't spent the time to try to figure out what the really detailed interactions are, but they're all tightly interwoven, which makes it even more complex to figure out what you do with it and how you do it. So I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. But it turned out to be a little more complex than I thought. So let's look at this. Management context. This is really driven by executives and senior managers. It's the way they think about the world, and that thought process drives through the organization. It may not be the reality. Culture's typically the reality part. But the management context is the way they work, the way they think, the way they want the organization to work. So it has a lot to do about values and leadership style, accessibility, whatever that is. There's a whole set of things, though, that your management team sets as the tone for the organization. And culture doesn't just happen, by the way. It's created. Structural context is really all the things about how your company is built. So these were intentional design elements. And there's a whole bunch of those, and they affect you too. So the one we think of most often is the organizational chart. So there's the way the thing's organized, and we've organized things into silos and all kinds of other stuff. Incentive systems, they're designed into the organization, and we see the havoc that they wreak. But it's also budget mechanisms, hiring kind of process, those kind of things. I mean, how you get money, that's a structural thing in your organization, and we all need money to operate. And then there's the cultural context, which all of you know and are pretty clear on. And it's really the way what we believe, right or wrong, what we believe is the way things really work around here. So sometimes we believe correctly, sometimes we believe incorrectly, sometimes the culture aligns with management context, and sometimes it doesn't. The biggest problem there is management never knows. They always believe it aligns with them because they are management. So everybody's going to follow it. So we've got all these different views. And then we've got the personal context, what I call the me factor. And this has a lot to do with how you personally view the world. And of course, you have to deal with others in the organization that have a me factor there too. But the reality is, this is a much bigger factor than we think. I do a lot of work with, in the past with architects, enterprise architects and stuff, and I can tell you, and I do a lot of work today with business architects, I think we're better than enterprise architects, but I can tell you a lot of the problems that they have are self-inflicted. I call this the pogo effect. Any of you remember pogo? You guys are probably mostly too young. Pogo was a possum that lived, a comic strip character who was a possum who lived in the Okefenokee swamps and was a philosopher. And Pogo's most famous line was, "We have met the enemy and he is us." And I think that would be true for most of us today around this stuff. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that falls in here. Strongly held beliefs, all those kind of things. The problem with this me factor thing is it's like looking through a window or looking through glasses. Or here in my case, I wear a contact lens. I don't notice them. I look through them, and they change the way the world looks to me. And that's exactly what happens in the way we think. We have all these paradigms about how we think, and it changes the way we see the world. And if we want to see the world differently, we've got to really start thinking about how we think, and that is pretty hard. So that's the concept. With me? All right, so what does all that mean? So here is probably an overly complicated model about this, but I think it's going to work. So I'm going to show you a series of steps you can go through to take this concept, apply it to good use, so that you can apply it to yourself in terms of business architecture, which is the example I'm going to use, or you can apply it to help your clients work through their issues because they have political and cultural challenges too. So The first thing that I picked up on when I started laying this out is it looks a lot like capabilities. Because what I see is that one, is there's a pretty common set of these things that all organizations have. I don't know what the set is. I've got, I think, 24 here on the page. I think there's at least twice that many, maybe 3 times that many. There's probably not over 100. But there's a set of these things that are pretty common in organizations. They're the cultural, management, structural, personal elements. So that starts telling me that, oh, I can map this stuff out. The second thing is they won't manifest the same, and you think about how do you, it's the same thing as capabilities. When I have a set of capabilities, if I'm in banking and you're in banking and you're in banking, we have roughly the same capability set. The question is, what do we do with it? What we do with it is different. We create competitive advantage with it. This is the same way. So I've got all of these contextual factors, but they manifest different in my organization. So in your organization, maybe we're all collaborative and happy, and in my organization, maybe we're competitive and angry. It shows up different. And the way they show up changes the way the organization works. And I think some organizations have a unique set. I do believe we'll find that just as we do in capabilities. You run into, when you build capability models, and you do that enough across a lot of companies, what you find is, yeah, about 80%, maybe 90% are the same for the industry, but there's some really unique things going on here. A quick example of that, I worked for a bank that was doing acquisitions. We bought a bank. That bank happened to have a big business in rail car leasing. I don't know why, but they did. We became the nation's largest rail car leaser overnight. We knew nothing about leasing rail cars. We finally decided we should sell that off. But you have these kind of things that pop up that are pretty unique. Some organizations might have different models, and you know this because there are different elements in your organization that have different cultures. In fact, there's a whole set of data out there about the management culture, the engineering culture, and that's the executive culture, the management culture, the engineering culture, which I think is fascinating, by the way. I was just reading about this. The executive culture sees people as assets. You buy them, you sell them, you hire them, you fire them. Just assets, just like chairs and monitors and all that stuff. The engineering culture, which is, some of you fall into this category, they try to fundamentally design people out of the system. So what are all these process analysts kind of guys doing? They're trying to get the process down so that you have no choice. You can only do a very small prescribed way of thinking. What have a lot of us technology guys doing? We're trying to get technology that replaces you so you don't have any effect, and we're trying to drive variability out. So who loves you? Middle managers. That's who cares about you. Why? Because they are the ones who know you get stuff done. This place runs on people. They're the ones who get it. And I've enjoyed most of my career. I finally learned just in the not too distant past here that the middle management group's the group I like. I don't like the executive guys. Sorry if there's any of you out here. But just not very attached to the executive guys because they have a whole different view of the world. And I grew up in middle management. I've consulted with middle management guys. I kind of like them. So anyway, organizations can have different things. The second step is just like a capability model. So now that I have all these elements, what do I want to do? I want to assess them. So here's one, leadership style. So I'm going to give you a couple examples here. The way I think about doing this is I come up with an element, and then I want to get the poles to this thing. And this is the hard part, by the way, and I think this will all change as I start talking to more and more people about it, because they'll be like, oh, no, wait a minute. Empowering is the element, and there's different poles. So we're going to figure that out. But leadership style is how the leaders, the executive senior managers, run the company and think about it. So in this case, one end is empowering, and one end is controlling. So on one end, it's all about giving independent freedom to people to go act. The other end is about putting a lot of process controls, governance, all that kind of stuff in place. And I can figure out where do I fit on that scale. Investment model, which is a nice way to talk about money. So this is how money moves around the organization. And the way I came up with this is structured and opportunistic. So in a lot of companies, there's a lot of structure around how you get money. So there's stage gates, there's this, and there's that, and the money is often pooled together in a very concise place, and you got to go through a very finite series of things. Other organizations, the one I grew up in, very opportunistic. All kinds of people had money. It was your job to convince them to give it to you. And if you were pretty good at sales and innovation and doing crazy things, you could get money. And it was really cool. So those are two very different models about how money moves across the company, but just kind of an example of structural kind of stuff. It's built in. It's not a cultural phenomenon. It's actually designed into the company. Cultural, working together. So we can either be collaborative or we can be competitive. So on the collaborative side, where do we get rewarded? We get rewarded for working with others, sharing with others, all that kind of stuff. On the competitive side, we get rewarded when we outdo everybody else. And in fact, oftentimes what you see there is people tell you, oh, the success pie is fixed. The more successful I am, the less successful you can be. That creates this competitive environment where everybody's struggling for resources and visibility and all that stuff. So that's a cultural phenomenon. And then there is very similar, and I picked this out to demonstrate this, there is this personal view of teamwork. So over here we're talking about working together. Here it's teamwork, and it really has to do with my style. Am I autonomous? In other words, I want to go do stuff myself and learn it and do it and be an independent contributor, or I want to collaborate with others. Well, I like working with others. I want kind of a what did I say here? Kind of a group success, group failure kind of thing. So there's upsides and downsides, that collaborative stuff, by the way, because we could all succeed as a group, and that feels pretty good. I get benefits, or we could fail as a group. It's not too bad. The rest of you guys screwed it up too, so I feel okay about it, kind of thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through whatever those elements are in all four of those categories and score them. Now remember, one of these categories is you. It's me factor stuff. So that's where you got to go home, get a good bottle of bourbon, look in the mirror, and think about it. So, I just added this, and I wanted to talk about the complexity of this thing and why it's so interesting. So I just took the four things we talked about, and I took the two polls there, and I here in this circle, what I've done is selected four ends here. So empowering, opportunistic, competitive, and autonomous. And that grouping works for me if I'm autonomous. And it works for me because an empowering environment says, go do your thing. That's what it's telling me. So I've got all the power to go do it. Opportunistic, again, kind of go do your thing. Find your way. Go do different things. Competitive, I'm competing against everybody else. They're all out there independently doing things. This works. This feels good. I can be successful. Be autonomous. Do good. I'm going to change one word. So I've just moved this from a competitive culture to a collaborative culture. Now what happens? The whole dynamics of this thing changes. So when you have a collaborative culture, all of a sudden that empowering stuff starts meaning I'm empowering groups, not individuals. And the opportunistic stuff happens because groups come together to start making things happen. So they can make bigger things happen than you can make happen. A great example of this is Google. In their infamous 20% time for engineers, they get to go work on whatever they want to. They're not all, everybody says, oh my God, everybody's off all over the place. That's not what happens. What happens is they look over there and say, Jeff's got a pretty cool project. I'm going to go work on his project. And what they do is they create a marketplace for ideas. That's what they're really doing. They have a dynamic marketplace for ideas, and people focus in. So they're collaborating now and doing all this cool stuff. Well, what happens if you're still autonomous and independent? Now you're competing against all these groups, and they're doing all this good stuff, and guess what? You can't be as successful. And all I did was change one factor there. So you see how this works? So it tells you a whole bunch of stuff, and you really have to think about this. So now that we're there, what we're going to do is we're going to assess each of these pieces. And so the way we're going to do this is the orange bar here is where we think the company is, or the organization, depending on what we're doing. So I'm just taking these four things, and I'm just drawing these bars in here. But the idea is to get some assessment about where we think it is. And oh, by the way, see, he hates this. I can see it now. Kids. Got to take care of the kids. The thing about this that I've seen over and over again is when we go out and assess capabilities, a lot of people talk to me about, well, what kind of scale do you use and all this stuff, and it's like, nah, ours is pretty simple. We get 6 business guys in the room, we ask them. And by and large, in about 2 minutes, they come to agreement. And the same thing happens here. If you start talking to people about culture, about the design of the organization, about the leadership intent, they'll come together pretty quickly. Again, the hard part is the personal part, because there you probably need some 360 feedback to find out how you really behave, because oftentimes you don't know exactly what you do. And if you've ever been through any leadership development stuff, I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to go through a bunch of that, and it's pretty akin to group therapy. So you got all these guys like, sitting around in a circle, laying on the floor crying, all this stuff, and it's like you're learning more than you ever wanted to know about yourself. So the idea is to assess all these things. Then, the next step of this thing is to select the elements that impact whatever it is you're trying to do. So if what you're trying to do is build an business architecture initiative, then that's what you look at. If you're trying to implement a project, if you're trying to get a strategy done, whatever it is, you look at what you're trying to do and say, which of these things matter to me? And you pick them out. So I've just randomly picked some here. So, and this brings me to an interesting part. So a question for you. On the first one here, empowering, controlling, which is better? Is it better to have an empowering management that turns people loose and gets all that energy going? Or is it better to have a controlling management that keeps their thumb on things? Who says empowering? Interesting. Who says controlling? Okay, and I know some of you are smart because both of you are wrong. And I know some of you didn't raise your hand, so you were like, oh, I'm ahead of this guy, I'm moving it. I saw Mary, for one, she just did not raise her hand at all. Here's the point, there is no positive and negative here. Which, if you think about it, it's the same way with capabilities. I'm going to keep coming back to that. In that when we talk about capabilities and we talk about are they mature or not mature, it's not relevant. The only thing that's relevant is what does this mean to me and what I'm trying to do. So if my capability can do what I need it to do today, it's good. It may not be able to do what I need it to do tomorrow. That's tomorrow. We'll worry about that. So the next step of this process is to say, where do I need these things to be? So I put them on the scale. You'll notice the scale has 0 in the middle, 5's on the end. That's intentional. I don't want any, there's no value judgment here. It's just how far off from the center are you? You with me? Okay. So I've gone through it, I've done all that. Now I can tell you which is positive and which is negative. Why? Because the side of the 0 that the green bar is on, remember debit's on the left, credit's on the right, that's how you know. Now I know that where on the side that I need it to be, that's what's positive to me for this one engagement that I'm doing. Maybe different the next time I do something, but now it's positive. And now the other side's obviously negative. All right, here, it's going to get tricky. Right now, here's where it starts getting hard, so don't, pay attention. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the whole scales, and I am going to number them 0 to 10, and I'm going to leave the bars on there right where they were, just got a different number scale. And now what I can do is I can look at this and say, here are where my challenges are, and here are where my opportunities are. So now what I have done is I've gone through a whole bunch of contextual elements, structure, management, cultural, personal, whatever they are. I've gone through a whole bunch of elements, and I've gone through a pretty simple process to say which ones are going to help me and which ones are going to hurt me. So it's like doing a capability model assessment. I now know where I am. What are the things that are going to do well for me, and which things I might want to think about working on? Perfect. Now I've got a model. And it's really cool. The question is, what the heck do I do with that? Because it's not about having a model and describing it and doing all that descriptive stuff. Any of you that have read the stuff I've written and stuff, it's not about being descriptive. I could care less about being descriptive. It's about what kind of action can I take. So what kind of action do I want to take? I want to build an action plan. And here are the 5 things that I could figure out that you do. One is, which of these things can I ignore? Because there's some of these things that just don't matter. Because if I go back, what am I going to look at? Information sharing. The scales are pretty close together. There's no big deal here. It's okay. I can ignore that one. Which elements can I leverage to my advantage? And again, back over here, that's the ones where there's opportunity, which means the organization has got a ton of this stuff and it's got more than I need. So I have an opportunity to leverage that, to do something special with it, to leverage it. And which elements can I mitigate to some degree? So now I've got to be creative and say, now I've got to build a strategy to mitigate that particular element. And that's where the power of this is, because what I see time and time and time and time again, organizations that ignore it, when in fact they could actually take some action. They can't fix it, they can't correct it, they can't make it different, but they can figure out a strategy to deal with it. And then, because I'm an architect, you got to look at everything. So are there elements I can change? Probably not, but you never know. Maybe you can change the incentive structure a little bit, and sometimes it just takes a little bit. I was able to do that one time with like $36,000. That's all it took. I was able to incent a small group of people to do an amazing amount of stuff. So sometimes you actually can change it a little bit, probably not too much on the cultural side. And then, which, I got to cope. There's some stuff that I can't fix, and it's not going to help me, and I just got to put up with the crap. And there it is. Let's lay it out and call it for what it is. So that's the model. You with me? All right. Here's an example. So what I've done here is I've picked two context categories, two elements out of each category. So I've got two: management, structural, cultural, personal, that kind of stuff. And then you'll notice I've changed this around. So what I've got is leadership, and here's the range effect: empowering, controlling, planning, focus, strategic to tactical. So now I'm just laying these out, the poles, okay? So those are the ones I'm going to do. So these are the ones, in essence, that I'm saying these matter. These are going to affect my project, in this case, building a business architecture initiative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to assess. And so now you see I've got all these things laid out. I've been through the assessment process that we just walked through. I've got the bar that says, where's the company? I got the bar that says, where do I need it to be successful? I've arranged that top to bottom, or positive to negative. Positive is at the top. And now I can look at where the opportunities are and where the challenges are. And the neat part is, like any other good architect, I can create a cool visual out of this. And you'll notice that there's a lot more red than green. Isn't that the way the world works? If there were a lot more green than red, this wouldn't be an interesting conversation. But the fact is that when you go look at projects and you go look at initiatives, this is pretty much what you see. While there's a whole big round of stuff been going on out there for the last couple of years about, leveraging your culture and all that kind of stuff. And there are good cultures. I do see them periodically. And you can leverage those, and you can work with those, and probably more of this would be green in that kind of organization. I think when I talk to most people, 70, 80% of the people I talk to, culture, context, all that stuff is getting in the way. It's not a positive effect. And I know in my 20 years in corporate, I lived in a shark tank. I mean, there was no cultural thing there that was good for you, trust me. If there was, somebody would shoot it dead, probably. Because the idea was, how could you tell if you were any good if you didn't have to struggle? I mean, right? So here's the example. And if you look here, I want to point out on the right-hand side is this power orientation. And if you'll remember, that's a personal attribute. And so what this says is, oh, okay, what I've got is a high need for control. Let's go back. So down at the bottom, the red bar is control. What I need to make this successful is the green bar. Now, being a student, I have to figure that out. Is on you. That's hard. But what that does is drive a big problem here to see this. So, and incidentally, here's a really interesting kind of thing, and I meant to mention this earlier. I talk to architects all the time, like I said, and here's a fascinating thing about the way we think. And maybe not this group. Doesn't apply to you guys. What we need, so think about this. Back to the, is it on here? Where is it? Empowering, controlling. Many more of you guys talked about empowering organization, that you wanted empowering organization. Here's the deal. I run into architects all the time, and they tell me, yeah, I want this organization to be more empowering. I want to be empowered, all that stuff. Great. I gotta instill governance, right? Because governance is the best practice, right? Two big problems there. First problem is that an empowered organization is not going to deal with governance very well. Why? Because empowering says everybody has a lot more freedom to do stuff. It's not about all this structural stuff. So if you want to implement governance, and you need governance to make your deal work, and you'll notice that's the way this model comes out, I think, is what you need is a more controlling organization, because that's what works for governance, is a whole bunch of structure and decision rights. It's really clear. There's a racing model. We all know what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. That governance works there. In an empowered organization where people can go act, be innovative, be creative, act in the moment, do all that kind of stuff, governance is not going to work well in there. So there's some schizophrenic attitude going on there. Yeah, I want it to be empowering, but oh no, I want to control everybody. So what that's really saying is, I want to be empowered, I want you to be controlled. And that's just a little dysfunctional on our part. The other thing I'd say here, just because I have a minute and I can kind of complain about one of my pet peeves. So here's a question for you. When I was with Forrester, we did a bunch of research, and here's what we saw. 80% of enterprise architecture programs had a governance process, okay? At least 80%. Better than 90% of those said they were relatively ineffective. They struggled to make them have any power, all that kind of stuff. You with me? But they had to do it because it was the best practice. Now, I just want you to stop and think about this. This is back to how you think about the world. So what's a best practice? A best practice is a model, a method, a tool, a technique that works across a wide variety of places, right? Because that's how it got to be a best practice. It's not unique practice. It's not innovative. It's a best practice because it works in lots of places. And because it's a best practice, I can take it, I can put it in my company, and it'll work 9 times out of 10. That's a best practice. So what do you call something that lots of people do and nobody is able to make it work? I would call that a worst practice. But you got to get your head around that because architects are going to tell you, no. And I have argued with dozens of architects about this. They will not let go of the fact that governance is a best practice for enterprise architecture. Guys, it's not. What's screwed up there is the way you think about the world. So, we'll come back to that one. So anyway, here's the model. Looks like this. So if this were the model, what would my action plan be? Well, one, if what I've got back here, look at on the left-hand side, I've got the investment model is very structured, not very opportunistic. So what am I going to do with that? I'm going to create an investment prioritization model using strategy, using capabilities. So what am I doing? I'm getting my stuff done. I'm getting people to buy into business architecture by aligning with that particular structural element, right? So I can leverage that. I can say, hey, you guys want to have structure around this? Let me help. I'm just going to give it the strategic twist and the capability twist so that now these things are falling in there. So mitigation strategy to overcome short-term planning focus. Well, instead of having the mega long-term vision, which we all love to do, let's just do next step stuff. So let's talk about 6 months, a year, whatever it is, whatever these guys will bite off on, and say instead of future vision of the company that's so far out nobody can grasp onto it, let's just draw that in till it's close enough that people can see that that's the next step. And then the next cycle I can go through and get another step. The next cycle I can go through and get another step. And what I can eventually do is every time I go through the cycle, I can cheat. And can just move it out another 2 or 3 months. And then move it out another 2 or 3 months. And then move it out another 2 or 3 months. So that what happens is, by the time I get done, I kind of got them out there where I want to go. What else? Mitigating strategy around empowering leadership style and personal control. So instead of looking at this governance stuff, kind of in that crazy way I talked about, why don't we build a collaborative governance process that instead of trying to control how people apply business architecture and follow the rules and follow the roadmaps and all that stuff, let's get people engaged and put a process around engagement so that now what we're doing is governing, but what we're really doing is collaborating on how we build all this stuff. And so we bring them to the table, they build it, and the next thing you know, it's theirs. I don't have to govern it. It doesn't matter. They're in it. It belongs to them. Ignore information sharing, teamwork, incentive structure. If you go back here, information sharing, teamwork, those are kind of positive, no-brainer stuff. Incentive structure is pretty bad, but maybe I can't change that. And then working together I'm in a competitive environment, just live with it, guy. You know, that's the way of the world. So that's what you can do with this stuff. So you can take this out, create this model, create action items on this model that will make you infinitely more successful because you're paying attention to culture and you're not letting it eat your lunch. So here's the bottom line. And for those of you who read the blog, I'd like to have a bottom line about what the hell does all this mean. At the end of the day, context, not just culture, but the context stuff, is not just a powerful force in our company. It is the powerful force. And you saw all the data aligned with that around business architecture, around culture in general. You yourselves validated that with your own little poll that you did. This is the number one thing. And it can be positive for you or it can be negative for you. Largely, it's your choice, by the way. And if we ignore it, which largely we want to do, it will eat your breakfast, lunch, and dinner and kind of leave you by the wayside, particularly if you have a very strong culture. But it can be managed. You can't make it right. You may not be able to make it exactly what you want it. And yes, managing it means you may have to give up on a few things that you believe strongly in, but you can do it if you just take a look at it and really understand what it is. And this personal context, which I haven't figured out exactly where to go with this, is basically the easiest to manage because it's just you. I don't have to change anybody else. It's just me. But it is the hardest to understand because, again, we have this glasses effect that we don't understand who we are, why we think the way we do, why we believe what we believe. One of the things I like about talking to business architects and dealing with them is that we can challenge one another, and so you're getting ready to get to ask questions and challenge me, and I hope you will, because I think that that's part of where you start beginning to see your blind sides is when people challenge you. So a funny story about that. I was working in tech support. I was running this highly technical team of, what are the MVS systems programmer guys? I mean, the cream of the crop on technology guys. And I had just taken over this job, and I made some brilliant decision. I have no idea what it was, but it was brilliant. Why? Because all my ideas are brilliant. And one of the systems programmers comes stomping into my office. I mean, literally stomping. I'm sitting at my desk. He's standing over me, and he says, "You are the dumbest SOB I have ever worked for." And he turns around, stomps out, and slams the door. And I wasn't too sure what to do with that. I mean, I'm sitting there, like, okay. Do I counsel this guy? Do I send him to HR? Do I just fire him? What do I do? What dawned on me, though, after about 5 minutes was, maybe there's some truth in this. Maybe I was the dumbest son of a bitch that he had ever worked for. And I decided just to let it go. And it worked great. He worked there till he retired. Well, you never know, I mean, you just don't know. So here's some stuff. I want you to stay in touch with us. We have an office here in Minneapolis. Steve Schultz, who's sitting back here. Raise your hand, Steve, so everybody knows who you are. Here's his email address, his phone number. You can get in touch with him, and I'm sure he'll buy you lunch. There you go. There's your big deal. I really do. One of the nice things is I've had lots of jobs, and I got this really fancy title at Acceler. But actually, I'm sort of a free radical. I run around and do stuff, and Acceler is very kind in supporting me in doing that. So I get to talk to lots of architects. I get to do lots of stuff. So I encourage you to, if you want to talk about this stuff or some other stuff about business architecture, send me a note. We'll talk. As Linda mentioned, if you're not reading the blog, shame on you. Really. I try to publish weekly. I have to admit I'm not doing so well on that. I'm 2 weeks behind now. But I do try to publish things that matter. I mean, this is not a fluffy blog. I mean, occasionally I got to get a little fluff in there, okay? But largely, it's thought leadership. I'm trying to think about things. I'm trying to explain things. I'm trying to look at problems. I do a lot of my idea testing there. I put things out there and see what people say, and I get some interesting comments back. So that the Business Architects Roundtable is an initiative we started this year. Well, the guys aren't, Bill's just joined the newest roundtable we have. Cargill's on the roundtable, Target's on the roundtable. This is kind of an invitation-only, specialized kind of thing, but it's a group of architects that get together and talk about the world and their lives and what they're trying to accomplish. It's a no-cost thing. I'm not out here selling stuff. All these things here that I'm talking about are no-cost things. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I don't know that you fit in one of the roundtables we're thinking about, but if you're interested in that kind of stuff, send me a note. And what? The Architecture Incubator Initiative, which really is where all this stuff came from. This is more of a Jeff initiative, but one of the things I'm doing is working with a variety of people, talking about stuff, trying to come up with ideas that would help business architects be successful. One of the things that you'll notice in this presentation, and you should notice in a lot of the stuff I do and write, is my focus is not how to build a better business architecture. There's a lot of people that do that. The Guild's got a whole bunch of good work. Acceler can certainly help you do that too. We do a bunch of that. My focus is how do I make successful business architects? Because if I do create successful business architects, then we're going to have a great business architecture. That's going to work. So I went through that pretty quick. It was pretty complex. For those of you who stayed awake for the whole thing, questions, comments, challenges. And I like it all. Remember, you can't be any worse than this guy that used to work for me.
Jeff's really good at, ask him something provocative, because he's really good at thinking through stuff with you. There we go.
Okay, good. I usually have at least a 3-question rule. Nobody can leave till we've got at least 3, and I hope for about 10. Yeah.
I want to go back to your comment on governance. The academic definition, I just looked it up, is one of them is management following the direction of the board of directors?
Are they following?
The board of directors says we're supposed to be this great insurance company or this great retailer or a great restaurant chain or whatever, with 10% sales increase, whatever. Governance is management doing what the board of directors says. So my comment, that one of the things I've noticed with architects is if architecture is doing architecture and best practice and the rest of the company doesn't perceive that as helping them be the best restaurant or the best retailer or the best insurance company, then architects kind of get funny looks. So yeah,
I get it. Here's the differentiation for me.
Okay.
And I was talking with somebody out here earlier, and we had a great conversation about this. Here's what most of us miss if you've never had an executive position, never had a top leadership position. Here's the part you miss. None of these guys have the power they think they have. And by and large, the organization does what it does. And the way you get the organization to do what you want it to do is you influence it. You don't control it. Yep, there's some governance stuff if you want to think about what the board of directors does, but what the board of directors largely is doing is providing guidance. It's not like you must do this or this or this. That's what they hired the CEO for, is to figure that stuff out. So I think it is a little different up there than it is down here for us. What my contention is that governance is a controlling mechanism that fundamentally hinders you from being successful. What you want is an influence mechanism that makes people want to follow you. When you do that, they will follow. They will do what you need them to do. What gets in our way around that largely is we believe we have a right way to do it, and then there's a million wrong ways to do it. The reality is there's a million right ways, and there's only 1 or 2 wrong ways. And we just have to be a little lighter about how we do that.
Oh, Garrett.
Garrett Gleason with Thrivent Financial. Jeff, I'd love to have your perspective on how do values factor into culture. Is it a way of saying there are attributes to describe what that culture is, but what's your perspective on values, and certainly at a personal level, but also at an organizational level?
That's really good. I'm going to answer that. I'm going to give you a consultant's answer for that. Okay, it's kind of hedge a little bit. First, there's what the company states the values are. That may or may not be reflected in the culture. So to your point about that, I mean, those may or may not align. So a good example of that is when I worked at the bank, I heard, like many other people, many of you have heard, employees are our most valuable asset. To which I say, BS, prove it to me. I want to see the proof of action in that from management. Because if you're laying off hundreds of people a year, that's not a true statement. And we were. And likewise, if you looked at what we did, the value was real estate. Because we moved people willy-nilly all over the place to maximize real estate. We didn't care how much time they lost. We didn't care how far they had to move from home. We didn't care about that crap. We just put them where it was efficient. So I think there is this disconnect between what our stated values are and what the cultural reflection is. The cultural reflection, I mean, there's a set of values that pop out of the culture. And I think those are the ones you got to pay attention to. Because either they're good values or they're bad values. Or probably a mix, but I think the culture develops the set of values that really affect us day in and day out. The other stuff doesn't matter. The personal part, though, that was really kind of insightful. I think one of the challenge, and most of us don't get challenged on this, I don't think, maybe, hopefully not too much, is when our values are out of sync with the company's values. And when that happens, I think there's a pretty big challenge. Because most of us, there's a whole bunch of reasons you work where you work. I've got the right kind of money, I got the right kind of position, I'm living in the right place. I mean, whatever. I don't want to pick my kids up and move them to Buffalo. I mean, whatever that is. I mean, I got a whole set of competing things that drive me to have to reconcile those values. Kind of back to a personal example. When I was with the bank, it took me 2 years to leave after this, and there was a whole host of other things that happened, but I was in a meeting where the CEO had said we got to lay off a bunch of people, which we did regularly, and IT got 90 people to lay off, okay? We had 2,000 people. 90 out of 2,000, everybody should be happy, right? We had 500 contractors. Now my position was, wait a minute, I got 500 contractors. I don't think I need to lay anybody off. I'm just going to go shoot about 60 contractors, and we're going to be done. I sat in a room with 5 CIOs, not a one of them would sign up for that plan. 2 reasons. Number one, they didn't want to go back to the CEO and argue. Bunch of wimps. These are CIOs. I mean, hell, they certainly argued with me. Second, they wanted to use this opportunity to get rid of the people they didn't want in their organizations, which meant they weren't doing their job as leaders. I sat there that day and I said, I don't want to be in this place anymore. This is nuts. And I figured out how not to lay off my share because I just wasn't doing it. And it was awful. So I do think there's some struggle there with personal values and corporate values and how that plays out. Back to the me factor and the personal stuff, I mean, that's a piece in there. I haven't figured all that out. But I do think that your values, at the end of the day, guys, you got to be true to your values. You're going to pay a price for that sometime in your life. But hopefully not every day, but sometime in your life you're going to pay a price for that. But if you don't do it, you're going to wake up one day and not like yourself very much. Right. I mean, that's a fact. And so I think that figuring out what truly means something to you, where the real values versus the, yes, kind of would like to be that, I think is pretty important. And we don't do enough of that. I mean, it's a fact. That's a great question.
Jeff, I think you raised a really good point there about the me factor, because I think it's personal values come into play as long as, you can have, like you were saying with the bank, right? Whereas you as an individual didn't buy into the crap, as you put it. And so you chose not to buy into it, but now you feel much better about yourself as an individual. So
but
it's
I didn't
that compromise.
I want to be clear, I didn't make as much money.
I hear you, but it is a cost you have to pay, right?
No, and I do think that, and just admit, there were times in my life when I don't think I did follow my values, and I didn't feel good about it, and that helped me understand why I wanted to do it, because I did things that were not in alignment, because I felt like I got to keep this job, I got to do what these guys want, whatever that is. But in the long run, the closer you can get to your, living your values, the happier you're going to be, and the more successful I think you're going to be.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, as I was looking at this, you gave the whole presentation in the context of, starting a business architecture initiative, but it looks as though, to me, like it's a general culture assessment that can be used across the board for any project or program that you would be moving forward
Absolutely.
with.
Absolutely.
So the question is with you as within the business architecture world coming up with this, do you have a group within XLR or did you use some sort of a generalized culture context model to build this, or is this your own invention?
I'm glad you brought this up because I forgot to say something very important here, and I'm glad you brought this up. So there's two parts to that question. One is we do have a group in Acceler that does help people through change kind of stuff. It's not so oriented toward culture, but it is oriented to change. You know, you get business architecture drives change. How do you manage that and get fit? So we do have people who do that. They did not help here. This is all off on my own invention from about 15 years of thinking about it. But this is not fully baked. And so one of the things, there's two things about this that I want to make you aware of. One is I'm very interested in people who have opinions, want to help contribute, do whatever they do to help figure out, does this work, can you turn in, that kind of stuff. The goal with this, by the way, is to turn this into a tool. I've been working on this Architect's Toolbox idea for a while. I've got 2 or 3 things almost there. This is one I think is close enough to do. And these will be free tools. They will not be things we charge for. These are going to be kind of open source things that we are going to put out under Creative Commons license so people can use them, change them, and do all that stuff. So if you're interested in this, this is my half-baked. I started off saying this is half-baked. So this is half-baked. I'd like to get fully baked. But I think to do that, you got to work with people, you know, go into companies and help them thrash through this stuff, get ideas from people, and do all that. So yeah, that's where it is. And but I expect I don't know, before the end's out, we'll have a better picture of this.
So none of those 3,000 books or 30,000 books had the basis for this in it?
No. And part of the problem is, by the way, I mean, you can do a bunch of cultural surveys and stuff, and why I decided not to do much of that for a couple of reasons. One is that's a laborious way to do anything. But the second part is, again, there's 2 things that drive a lot of the kind of ideas that I put out there. One is there is some research behind it. I do have some research behind a number of things I do. The other things are, I just lived through a bunch of crap. I'm older than all you guys, and I've lived through a bunch of crap. That's the best way to describe it. And I'm trying to take some of the things I've learned and figure out, well, how do you give that to somebody else? And I can talk about this stuff intuitively and, oh, yeah, but to turn it into a tool, to turn it into a method, a process, something that you can get your hands around and say, I can do that. I think that's pretty good, and I'll feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I think it's a great application of business architecture tools and concepts with the whole, it looked like a capability model, which you did with the, you know, I mean, you could see it in there. And so I love the connection because as architects, we apply what we know to other things. It's patterns and models, and you did exactly that, and I think it made sense to me.
And so to your point, what I would like to see is business architects apply this model to themselves first. They let you get your hands on, I believe, in eating your own dog food really big time. So when I go in and help people design their business architecture practice or redesign it, I apply business architecture principles to it. I mean, we do a value map, we do a capability model, we look at all this stuff. We go through this kind of thing, whether it's intuitively or structured. Next time I do it, it'll be very structured. But I believe in eating your own dog food. So I'd like to see you do this there, but then you're exactly right. Then it becomes a tool in your toolbox to help other people. Because I can tell you, people don't know. Here, my story on that is a guy left the company, came back 5 years later. He came to see, I used to work for him. He came to see me, he says, this whole company's changed. We would have done 5 years, we'd probably done 20 mergers by that time. And he says, I don't understand what's going on around here anymore. New players, new manager, what the heck's happening? And I said, okay, let's go in the room. So we go in a conference room, big whiteboard, and for an hour and a half, I draw on this board, and I explain to him what's happening. And we get done, and he says, wow, that was really helpful, thank you. I did not understand that. And I stepped back and looked at the board and said, I didn't either. I mean, there was all this stuff going on around me that I didn't really, I mean, it wasn't right here. I didn't, because I hadn't written it down, I hadn't worked it out, I didn't actually understand it. And so by helping him understand it, I understood it. And so that's, again, kind of how this stuff works, is I take this stuff that I think I got, I write it out, some of it works, some of it doesn't. I don't know.
So, Jeff, I'd like to bring you back and get a perspective on one of your earlier slides where the graph indicated the top 3 preventatives of a business architecture practice.
Yeah.
An observation on that I'd like your perspective is at the bottom of it was people. And so my question comes in, if you invert the table and think that organizations are willing to formalize, fund, and identify business architects in their roles, What is the thought on your perspective on that they've brought the people in, but they still feel that there's that political or social barrier to continue to advance beyond that?
So let me see if I understand that question. So what you're saying is that, well, the organization funded the group.
We hired the people.
So they hired the people and put the group together, but then they didn't do the rest of the stuff. I want to go back to another. I feel like I'm telling a lot of personal stories here, but I know you guys are my friends. I wanted to do enterprise architecture, and my CIO kept starting up these group kind of things to do it, and let me lead this. I want to do it. No. Romero is an organizational fixer. I want you to be over here fixing this organization. That's what you do best. Went through 3 iterations of this, failures, all the ones. So we put together this group, actually, of the top 12 smartest technology guys we had to go figure out how to move us off mainframes onto distributed computing, all this stuff. And they needed somebody, after a while, they weren't doing anything, and they needed somebody to lead it. Turns out he had delegated that to somebody I knew. Went to talk to him. I got the job. So I became our first architect. My CIO, who I'd worked for a long time, calls me into his office. And he says, okay, smart guy, you got the job. I'm not helping. Just want you to know, I'm not helping. I was so happy to get it, I didn't care. What I know, I was an idiot. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. The message there, though, was this, the way you will succeed here is through influence. And the more structure senior managers put over this, that thou shalt do this, thou shalt do this, that thou shalt do that, they're taking away your ability to influence. So fundamentally, they're hurting you if they do that. So that's number one. The second thing is they don't know whether you're right or not. I mean, you come up with all this process. I mean, come on, who's proven out that all this stuff works? Anybody? No? I don't know anybody. I mean, there's no Harvard Business Review article that says business architecture saves the world. There is none of that. So they don't know. They're taking a bet. It's a flying leap. Can you guys do this or not? The third thing that you got to know that architects just don't like to hear, but is this. When you are a P&L manager running an organization, there is only one thing that matters: making the number. And my wife ran a $400 million business, and she was on the operating committee, and once a month the CEO brought him in, and all the guys that made money were around the table, and he went around the table. He had 2 questions. Are you going to hit this quarter's numbers? This quarter, are you going to make the numbers? And if you're not, what are you doing about it? That's it. You can say, did you talk to those architecture guys? Are you looking ahead? Dad, it was very, very focused. And here's the reason. If I tell all my managers that, you guys got to get your number, but you also got to listen to these guys, and you got to go through this process, and you got to do this, bingo, the accountability went away. Think about this for a minute. If you've not ever run a P&L, you have no idea what pressure is. Because what happens when you run a P&L is this. You have no control. You sign up at the beginning of the year for a number. I'm going to make us $10 million. You have no control over competitors. You have no control over federal regulations. You have no control over the economy. You have no control over the weather. You have no control over any of that stuff. And still, you are held accountable to make that number. Nobody cares that there was a huge snowstorm and the trucks didn't get the stuff. That's not the CEO's problem. That's your problem, because your job is to figure out how to make up for it. The fact that the competitors came out with a better product, that's your problem to go solve. What do you do about that? That's the way that works. Over in the support side of the world, we don't understand that very well, because we don't have that much accountability. And so we tend to think different. So one of the things you want is, if these guys are running these organizations, you want them to have 110% accountability for results. And every time you tell them they must do something, you take a piece of that away. So to me, the way the world works is exactly right. It's our job to adjust to that and figure out how to be successful. And again, I think the way we do that, is, what I tell architects about this is, there's a whole lot of ways to be successful. Bottom line is, you got to be so good, the bastards can't ignore you. That's the bottom line. You just got to be so good that they're going to listen to you. They're going to want what you do. Then they're going to do it. That's the way you do it. You don't get there because some senior executive decides, yeah, we're going to do this. It's helpful sometimes if they got a light touch, but it's got to be pretty light. Otherwise, it becomes audit. Anybody here love auditors? All right. I actually love auditors because I learned how to, back to this context stuff, I learned how to manage them. Yeah. And they became my friend. I got a lot of stuff done.
So we have time for probably 2 more.
Well, it's 6, but you guys have to decide if you're, I have time for more.
So Jeff, can you stick around if anybody has more questions?
I'm good.
All right, so, well, thank you. Let's give Jeff a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
And I want to say a special thank you to our guests from Des Moines. Linda will be coming to your next meeting. I'm not certain how many buses she's taking, but sign up for the buses with Linda for the next chapter down in Des Moines. So, party buses. Mary's planning a party bus. So between Mary and Linda, they're on their way to Des Moines. Any last questions for Jeff? All right. Thank you again to Thrivent. Really appreciate you guys bringing Jeff in, and thank you all for coming.
I'd love it if you'd go to the LinkedIn group and continue this discussion. It'd be fun. I think there's more to say on this. Thanks.